of key parts of the scheme. So the project, services or activities you are requesting funding for must take place directly in Berinsfield and be able to show benefits for Berinsfield residents. You can apply for both capital and revenue grants. There will be one application per organisation, and that will be submitted for both types of funding, so capital and revenue. And the scheme closes at midday on the 1st of June. So to run you through the application process. So first of all, you submit your application. We then check your eligibility criteria. Your application is assessed and scored, and then we determine what the grant awards are. We'll then send you an offer letter. If you're successful, we'll also write to you if you aren't successful. We'll then ask you to sign the relevant conditions or the grant agreement. We'll then make the grant payment, which may be in stages, which I'll come on to later in the presentation, and then we will monitor your grant. So scheme eligibility criteria. So who can apply? Any constituted local not-for-profit organisation delivering services that will benefit the residents of Berinsfield. Locally, we mean ideally based in Oxfordshire, preferably based in Berinsfield. Berinsfield Parish Council can apply, and also not-for-profit preschools and PTAs for local authority-run schools or academies can apply for non-statutory elements of the education programme. If you're unsure of these non-statutory elements, please contact us and send us details of your specific question. Also, local not-for-profit organisations. This include companies limited by guarantee, which does not distribute any surplus it makes to its members. And the primary purpose is to benefit the residents of Berinsfield. If you're unsure whether you're eligible, then please contact us at our Berinsfield email address. So funding types. So don't forget, you can apply for both revenue and capital grants. So for revenue grants, you can apply from 1 to 5 years. The minimum grant you can apply for is £500, up to £25,000 per year. So the maximum amount you can request is £125,000 over 5 years. Now this is capped at 50% of an organisation's total annual running costs. You can also apply for a one-off revenue project, for example, an event. In total, there is £225,000 available for revenue grants. For capital grants, the minimum amount you can request is £5,000, up to £60,000. You can only submit a request for one project, and we will fund up to 100% of the project cost. Please note, if you are successful with your application and you aren't awarded 100% of your capital costs, we will need to understand what your fundraising plan will be to raise the rest of the money to complete your project. Now, the grant will be for new projects only. Unfortunately, we're unable to grant you any money for retrospective projects. In total, there is £120,000 available for capital grants. Now, projects up to £25,000 must complete within 12 months, and projects over £25,000 must start within 12 months of accepting the offer and be completed within 24 months. So what are different types of revenue funding? So it could be salary costs relating to services and activities. It could be rent and rates, utilities, the location of your service. It could be for marketing, publicity. It could be for surveys or studies to assess improvements needed for community facilities. It could also be used for community festivals and event costs. These are just a few examples. There are many more in the funding policy and in the application form itself, which will show you shortly. But please just email us if you're unsure. So types of capital funding. It could be purchasing new or replacement equipment, for example, tables, chairs. It could be improvements to community halls or other facilities that provide services. You could install play zones, such as multi-use games areas, or you could invest in energy-saving measures. You can also purchase electronic hardware, such as laptops. Again, these are just a few examples. There are more in the funding policy and the application form. So before we pass over to Haz to show you a demonstration of the application, let's see if there are any questions before we move on to the next section.
Madeline, I can't see any questions in the chat so far, so I'm assuming that everything is all good. So I suggest that we probably move straight over to you, Haz, and if there are questions that people think about while you're running through yours, then you know, by all means do pop them in the chat and we can cover them at the end of the session. Thank you. Back to you, Haz.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thanks, Madeline, to starting off the presentation. My name is Hasrat and I work within the Community Enablement team. And as Madeline said, I'll go over the sections 1 to 6 at the beginning of the application. If you're not familiar with our grant system, this is the first page you will see once you've registered to apply for the scheme. Bit of summary information, background information on the green scheme itself, and then you'll be in view of this section here, which will outline each of the sections from 1 to 10. If we begin with section 1 on who can apply. Load up. So I won't go over every single question within the sections. I'll touch upon the questions which we feel that may need further explanation just to help you out when you're completing the application. But if you do have any questions at all or feel that the questions you don't quite understand or need a bit more information on it, just let us know by emailing us into the Berinsfield main mailbox. If we just begin with the first question, which will be a very important one, and those of you who have applied to the council before, you will know that we always ask for a signed governing document, and you can attach that here. We would preferably like a constitution, set of rules, or articles of association, standing orders, anything like that, to prove that the organisation is a not-for-profit organisation. That will help us process your application. You can upload that here. And then underneath that, we would like you to confirm you've got named organisations, named officers within the organisations, and that can be provided from a minutes from a meeting, AGM, or within the constitution itself, and you'll be asked to upload that here. We move on to section 2 of the application. Section 2 is all about your organisation itself, not necessarily to do with the type of funding that you will be applying for, but the organisation itself. So what I'm going to go now is briefly describe the next series of questions, which can be seen here. And what we're asking for here is a bit more background information on your organisation to see if you receive any minimal financial assistance, MFA. Some of you may be familiar with MFA, or as it was previously known, de minimis or state aid funding. Those of you who are not familiar with this type of funding, it relates to organisations that sell their goods or services, and it was put in place to make sure that no organisation received an unfair advantage in the open market by limiting the amount of financial assistance or grants they receive within a given time period. So this is meant to help us understand your organisation better, to see if you do receive this type of funding at all, so we can, you know, press ahead accordingly. A full explanation of what MFA is, it will be provided to you in the associated documents with this presentation after this session is finished. But again, if you want further clarification at all, just email into the Berinsfield main mailbox, which we'll give you at the end of this session. If we press ahead and go on to the next 2 questions, which we would like to highlight, that you may feel they're kind of familiar, but actually they're asking 2 types of answers. The first one is, have you recently applied to South Oxfordshire District Council for any funding and is yet to be awarded? What we would like to know here, whether it's more related to COVID business grant, seal, Section 106 contributions, or any COVID-19 response funding. We just need to know this here. So again, it's like to do with double funding or not, or if you haven't received any funding from us, we would look to your past funders and gain a reference at all if we need to. And the second question's all about double funding, mainly to see whether you applied to revenue capital grants in the past or recently or yet to be awarded one. So it's the same question, but asking for two separate answers here. Again, any questions at all you feel uncomfortable about, just email into us. The next question would be on this section is to make sure that you, as an organisation, have all the policies and insurance documents for your organisation in place. You will need to select all of them within the checkboxes in order to move over, as it's a mandatory field. Just quickly, if it's a mandatory field question, there will be a red asterisk there. There is a bit more explanation around this and how you can obtain these documents if you haven't got that. That's on our website, and the document's called Are You Ready for Funding? It's on the Berinsfield Grants page. But again, we can provide that to you after this session as well. Moving on to section 3 of the application. So section 3 gives you an overview on the 2 types of grants you can apply within this one application. So you've got revenue and capital funding. So that will give you a bit of a background on the examples that Madeline was referring to earlier. For example, what type of costs you can do and how long for revenue and what type of capital costs associated with your project. You won't need to complete anything on this page. It's more of an overview page for background information. If we move over to section 4. Now, section 4 is really where we start to shape your application. So this will tell us whether you as an applicant are submitting an application for revenue funding or capital funding, or both, because you can do that. So the first question asks you what type of funding you're applying for. So if you are doing a revenue only application, then please select revenue and you'll be prompted to complete the information below. If you're only submitting a capital application, it will ask you to move on to the next section and you can completely ignore this. If it's revenue and capital application, then you will need to complete this section as well as the next one, which will be capital. As Madeline said, you can. We've decided to separate the application into revenue and capital just to make it a little bit easier for the application process. If we go down, I'll go down very slowly so you can see. You've got more examples of revenue costs as well as type of revenue costs that will not be supported within your application. It's a bit more background information there. And again, here's the email address if you want further clarification at all. So the question here is, please upload a budget for the estimated cost to provide the above activity or service each year, covering all the costs that you're applying for funding. If there's a shortfall in funding, please tell us how you intend to cover these costs. So we're preferably looking for an Excel sheet, which you can upload here. And it clearly demonstrates a clear budget for the estimated cost for the service activity you are seeking funding for. Again, a bit more information here. You can do minimum of £500 per annum for each year and a maximum of £25,000 per annum. The next question, we felt that we need a bit more information from you guys, is that please describe the local need for the service activity you're seeking for and share how you identified this need. So how did you get to this point? What made you as an organisation want to provide this service or activity for the residents of Berinsfield? A bit more background information here just to build your application with us. And again, if you've got any evidence to support those needs at all, it will certainly round off your application nicely by providing with some documents here. And then we move on to outcomes. Outcomes is always a tricky word to get your head around. So what outcomes are you expecting as a direct result of the service activity you're requesting funding for? So are you expecting, if you just list them, full sentences, bullet points, as long as it can be clearly seen as a direct result of this application, how it will benefit those residents and the outcomes you're hoping to achieve, it will just round off the application for us. And also, how did you get there? So it's always a reason behind it. We would like to know those reasons. If you did any research or you got some data behind it, you can provide that here. And also upload that evidence to us within this section here. And also, you would need to complete a target submission form for us. That can be located here. It will open up an Excel sheet. Those of you who have completed a revenue application with us this year, it's something familiar to that target submission form. So you will need to download that, complete it, and re-upload it here. It is 20 megabytes per upload, so you could do more than one document if you choose to do so. And the last question on this section is to confirm that you understand that we're unable to fund more than 50% of your annual operating costs based on the 2020-21 financial year. And it's just a simple checkbox for you to confirm you understand that. Moving on to section 5 of the application, it's capital. So this is all about capital funding. The first question on this section is exactly the same as revenue. So what type of application are you willing to submit to us? Is it capital? Yes. Okay, complete this section. No, I'm only doing revenue. Okay, move on to the next section. So let's assume we're doing a capital, similar to revenue, bit of background information here. And also what would not be covered in your capital project here. So what we need to make clear on this section, the very first thing, is the start and end date to the project. As Madeline's gone over the start date and end dates for capital already, but briefly, projects, the value listed here as well. Projects awarded up to 25,000 must complete within 12 months of accepting the offer, and projects awarded over 25,000 must start work within 12 months of accepting the offer and complete within 24 months. So we need to you need to be very clear within the start and end dates of your project here. The next question, the next series of questions actually that we need further information on is providing evidence of ownership of the property, interest in the property, or a lease within 10 years. What we need for you to demonstrate is that you will be in ownership of it or still leasing the property after the grant here is finished. So the local residents do benefit of it and it doesn't go to a privately owned company at all. And also, just to back that up, do you intend to transfer the ownership or lease some of the facilities to another non-profit? Again, here we're just looking for that consistency in the last question. This question very familiar from the capital application if you submitted one, just to make sure that you've got all the necessary consents in place for your project. So that would be anything to do with planning permission or listed building consent. If you don't have those consents in place, and we're going through the eligibility criteria section after you've completed your application with us, we could reject your application on that. So please be clear here. Moving on to the next section, which is finance. We will require a latest bank statement from your organisation. You've got to make sure it matches the name within this application, and it can be no older, than 2 months old. You can upload that here, and also we need to see the organisation's most recent financial accounts or working budget and financial plan for for the year. If you're a new organisation, you can upload that here. The next two questions is quite specific to revenue and capital. So again, if you're only applying for revenue, you will select yes, and then you'll be asked to provide a financial forecast covering the number of years you're applying for. So if you're applying for 3 years worth of revenue funding, you'll be asked to provide 3 years of that, and we've helped you out by providing a template which you can download here. If you're only applying for 1 year's worth of revenue funding, then you only need to provide for that 1 year. Again, if you're applying for revenue, you can just select no and move on to the next section. Otherwise, if you are applying for capital funding, we will need to see a budget for the project, including all sources of funding if applying for less than 100% of your total projects. And it will be handy to know if the funds are secured or unsecured, and you can upload that information here to us. Or also, if there's a shortfall of funding for your project, please tell us how you intend to cover the difference in that. You can upload that here. If your capital project is to do with any building work, we will need to see 2 quos or a professional estimate to come alongside your application, and you can upload them here. And also, if you're requesting over 10,000, please provide a project plan, including ongoing maintenance arrangements here. So it's quite a lot of information, but again, if you've applied to a revenue or capital grant with us recently, the questions are near enough the same as those, but tweaked slightly. The next section is all about scoring, so I will hand it back over to Madeline in a second, but I just want to check with Cheryl if there's any questions in the chat that I need to go over.
Thanks, Haz. There are a couple actually from Amanda. Thank you, Amanda. So I'll just go over those now. The first one was, how detailed does your budget need to be? Good question. We're not asking for it completely line by line, but if, for example, you were applying for revenue funding to provide towards your core running costs of whichever organisation you run, then we would be thinking about things like your salary costs, any training costs that you might have for staff, perhaps your utility bills, things that you need to pay to keep the lights on, really, to make sure that you're providing that service. So hopefully that gives you enough information there. But if when you come to do it, you've got further questions, by all means drop us an email and we can have a look. But I wouldn't say in minute detail, but just think about those core costs that you're considering. In terms of the operating costs, so Amanda's asked the question, we work in other areas in South Oxfordshire. So is it the overall operating costs or the operating costs for the services within Berinsfield? Now, when we're asking about operating costs, you are able to take it as your overarching operating costs to ensure that you won't be applying for more than 50% of your overall operating costs for your organisation. But when we come to the actual budget for your project, it does need to be just relevant to Berinsfield. So if your project was wider than that, it would just need to be prorated for Berinsfield. Just see what the other one, with revenue being capped at 50%, what happens when we are closed from March 2020 to March 21? Our running cost was 0. Okay. Very good question, and probably not one that I can answer now. We did find that there were quite a few organisations who were in a similar situation with our revenue grant scheme, which we just opened, and there were some actually that did incredibly well during that period. Let me take that one away, and we will consider whether or not there's anything further that we could do, whether or not we would be able to look at a previous year. At the moment, the policy is actually to take it on your running costs from the last financial year, which would be 2021. Okay, Madeline, I'll hand back over to you now.
Okay, so as I've shown you the first few sections of the application form, and then you'll be asked a series of questions, and that's what your application will be scored against. So there is 10 questions that will be scored against, and that's set criteria for community benefit, sustainability, and partnership working. The total score is out of 32. Now, please note, capital and revenue funding requests are scored separately, so you will be asked to submit separate answers in the application form. Each question is scored from 0 to 3, and there are 2 additional points available if you could provide evidence of collaboration with the community or partners in delivering the project, services, or activities. Applications will be ranked into high, medium, and low, dependent on the score. High priorities are likely to get the requested funding. Medium priorities may be funded once all the high ones have been awarded. Low priorities are unlikely to receive any funding. If you look at Appendix 1 in the funding policy, it shows a scoring matrix, and Haz will now show you the actual questions in the application.
Thank you, Madeline. So yeah, I will go over the section 7 till 9, which will demonstrate the scoring criteria within the application form. As throughout the application you've noticed, we've separated revenue and capital because 2 types of funding in this single application, and that's what we're treating the next sections with in terms of scoring. You can find a link to the scoring criteria here as well, which will direct you to that appendix. The first question is very similar to the others. What type of application are you applying for? So if it's capital, then you will need to skip this section, because this is focusing on revenue, and the next section will focus on capital. So if you do yes. So just to reiterate, this section you can score up to 24 points, and to get those points, you need to select each objective here that matches your project or service that you're seeking revenue funding for. So once you've selected each of these sections, objectives, sorry, like so, you will then need to explain each objective that you feel appropriate within your revenue application within the text box here. So the way we think it's best to provide us with explanations of how your revenue application meet those objectives is to answer it very individually and not do a long essay or anything like that. You can do brief descriptions on each objective individually. I think that's the best approach. So we provided examples here. So objective 1 is serve a critical population such as children, youth and elderly. And then you could begin to say our project, service, activity will benefit, and then provide us with your explanation. If you've got any evidence to back up those objectives, you can upload that here, which could mean it could help your score get those bonus points, as Madeline was referring to. This could be additional information, testimonials, photos, or reports for each objective ticked. You should have enough file size. Like I said, it's 20 megabytes. You should have enough there. Moving on to the next section. As I said, we've separated it for community benefit and capital and revenue. So the makeup of it is exactly the same. If you're not applying for capital within your application, just press no and then move on to the next section. But otherwise, it's exactly the same format. Select each objective and then provide the examples below individually here, and then again, provide the evidence there. So that's the community benefit part of the scoring. The next section we move on to is section 9, which is asking sustainability and partnership questions within the scoring. So sustainability here, a bit of background information for you there. And remember, you can score up to 3 points within this section. Provide us with as much information here within this text box. And remember, if you're applying for revenue funding as well as capital, then please do separate them as we've shown you here into this section, into this text box. And then you can upload any evidence supporting those statements here within the file upload here. And remember, if you can back it up and it's clearly demonstrates your outcomes, you could be awarded those potential bonus points here. Partnership working, this is where you can score up to 5 points within your application. In the drop down, if you say yes, that you are actively working with other organisations, press select yes, and you will see the section here. If you do select no, you will score no points because it's showing that you are not working with other organisations. So please select yes. Similar to sustainability, please do separate it if you're applying for revenue funding as well as capital. And then like sustainability and community benefit, if you've got any evidence to back up statements within this text box, you can upload that information here. The final sections is the standard declaration page and submission. But again, if you've applied to us before in the past, it will be similar, but some of it will be different to coincide with this specific grant itself. So Cheryl, if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer. If not, we can move on to Madeline to continue.
No, nothing further in the chat has.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Madeline.
Okay, thanks, Haz. So I appreciate it is quite a long application form, but please remember it does allow you to apply for the two separate funding grants. It may appear quite daunting, but we're here to help and support you. So please do get in touch with us if you have any questions. So that's the application submitted. And now it's time to decide on awarding the grants. So this slide shows you the decision-making process for determining the grant awards. So first of all, the Community Enablement Team will review the eligibility of each application, and if there's any missing documents, they will liaise with you. The Garden Villages team assesses and scores the application in line with the scoring matrix. The Head of Policy and Programmes, Finance and Cabinet Member for Community Wellbeing will determine the grant awards. To oversee that, we have an advisory board with 2 independent representatives. So payments, I'm sure you're interested as to when the payments will be made. So these are indicative timescales. Decisions will be made on the grants in this summer. The payment timescale is actually dictated by the grant value, the type of agreement that's required, and how quickly we receive the signed agreement. So if only terms and conditions are required, then you're likely to receive a payment in September or October. If a grant agreement is required, then it's probably going to be the end of this year, early next year. Capital and revenue grants will receive individual grant letters and be paid individually. So revenue grants, if they're up to £10,000, they'll be paid once per year. Anything over that will be paid in 2 equal stages per year. Standard terms and conditions are applicable for grants up to £25,000. Grants for capital will be paid in 2 stages, half up front and half when the project completes. Again, for capital grants, standard terms and conditions will be applicable. So I'm giving you these timescales to allow you to plan for your project and your activities before you submit your application. So for example, if you're applying for a large capital grant, you may not receive it until the end of this year. So it's really to help you to plan your projects. So that is the end of the presentation. We'll now look to see if there are any more questions in the chat box, but for any specific questions, we will get back to you in due course. Please note, all questions will be responded to and we'll update our FAQs. But can we see if we have any questions in the chat box?
Thank you, Madeline. Yeah, we've just got one more from Phil. How are you identifying independent representatives that are not already linked to one of the applicants? We will ensure that any independent representatives that we have on the board won't have any conflicts of interest, and we will get a declaration from them in order to ensure that, yes, clearly that it's a fair application process and that they don't have any conflicts of interest. So I think just rest assured that that is something that we would make sure happens. Will we be made aware of who? Good question, Phil. I can double check when we have determined who those representatives are going to be. I don't see any reason why it couldn't be shared, but we can certainly update you via Madeline on that. Are there any further questions? Okay.
Well, thank you very much. So thank you very much for attending, everybody. As I said, we will be sending out the slides after this webinar and the recording and any associated material. Please feel free to send them on to others. It will be added to our website, so all the information is there. But if you need any additional support, then please do just email us. So unless anyone's got any further questions, then we will close. Thank you all. I hope you have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.